Welcome to the Gourds and Pomegranates podcast, talking common sense for church communications. Here's Hannah and Joe.
And we are back with another guest. Today we have, I want to say Dan, who works for Community Dan, but is your Community Dan. So today we have Dan, who is based, for me, I think you're like literally the other end of the country. You're up in Scotland, aren't you?
I am indeed, yeah. There's still a bit more of Scotland further north of me, but yeah, I am certainly further away from where you are, yeah.
Yeah, but it's so lovely for you to be joining us today. You have a really interesting job, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it. But would you like to just give yourself a quick introduction as to your title, because I think that's very helpful of just understanding sort of context.
Yeah, so my title is officially a church and community developer, and we'll kind of dig into what that means. And absolutely, as you say, we go with the branding of Community Dan. I'm one of these people that doesn't necessarily like putting myself, I write myself out of projects so that other people can take over things. But my social media handle for a little while had been Community Dan, and many people said that works as a branding. So when I went freelance, that was it. So yes, I am Dan who works for Community Dan, but I am Community Dan, and there's no one else. It's just me.
Doesn't mean you can only recruit other Dans then, like if you expanded.
Well, I mean, there are many things, and in fact, someone sent me a little while ago a T-shirt that said, "If all else fails, go back to doing what Dan told you in the first place." Like so, you know, that I guess that could work for many other names, I'm sure, but the thought was there. It was good.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good.
Nice. So, I mean, we're going to definitely delve into that job title because that's fascinating. One of the favourite job titles I've ever heard, if I'm completely honest. But we've got some quick fire questions to help the listener get to know you. So, what's your favourite biscuit?
I would normally go something gingery. So, although I suggested a stem ginger cookie and I got accused of being a hipster. So, you know, but I'm going to put it out there.
No, I like that.
Wasn't aware stem ginger cookies were that hipster. Maybe I'm out of
They
touch.
remind me of my gran. Like, there's very nostalgic. Like, that's I know. In an affectionate.
You're getting mixed messages there, aren't you?
No, that's wonderfully nostalgic and nice. No, but they have to be nice, like good quality stem ginger biscuits, like where there is a little bit of burn to them.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's medicinal as well. Ginger is good for the body.
It's good for you.
Yeah.
I heard a podcast recently. A guy was talking about training himself to have hotter and hotter foods, and his tolerance was so low that he started with ginger biscuits.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, bringing it back to comms. Thinking of social media, what are your favourite platforms to use?
So I wouldn't necessarily say favourite, but the one I'm on the most is the Book of Face. So I'm on there the most of the time. I've recently been delving into Blue Sky.
I noticed the logo on your website. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have left the artist formerly known as Twitter, and I'm over on Blue Sky now. So exploring and seeing where that was. But Facebook or LinkedIn really are the places I spend most of my time.
Yeah.
Super.
Yeah. I can't quite bring myself to leave Twitter, but to all intents and purposes, I have left Twitter.
Yeah. Well, for a while, my profile on Twitter was, "I'm only here because my school refuses to stop using this as their only form of communication."
Yeah.
And now the school have stopped using that as the only form of communication, and in fact
point.
not communicating at all. But that's a whole other subject. So I had no other need to be there. So I was away.
Fair enough. Do you have any favourite podcasts? Any regulars that you tune into each week?
So this is very terrible to admit on a podcast, is that I don't really get into a lot of podcasts at the minute. I'm really sorry.
Thank you, Dan, for coming on. Next week we're going to...
Well, there's a brilliant one I've heard of called Gourds and Pomegranates. So I don't know if you've heard of that
I've
one.
Heard of them. I think they're pretty cool.
Supposed to be pretty good. There were a couple of podcasts that I spent a lot of time listening, and sadly the person that did those is no longer with us. He passed away last year after a final battle with cancer. But they're still there to go and have a look at, from a guy called Steve Legg. Who was an absolute inspiration, and blessed to call him a friend as well. So he had one called Men's Health Matters podcast, where it was Steve and Dr. Ken Ferguson, another friend, So they were talking about lots of men's health matters. So the back issue, those are still there in the interweb to have a listen to. So they're well worth going back to. And there's a couple of other ones. So there's one called Charity Voices from Bruce Tate Associates. So they, as the podcast would suggest, talk to various voices who are working in charities. So it's a long day at the office coming up with that title, but that's really good again to get different perspectives. And I couldn't be here and not mention the Pure 24/7 Radio podcast, as I'm a presenter on there, and all our interviews go on that podcast as well. So there's some really, really interesting chats from people who are either working in faith organisations or using their faith in what they do. So so those are a couple that I would go to.
Nice. I mean, you could definitely have got away with like not saying the first bit, because you've then just named like 3 brilliant podcasts. So. And talking about long day at the office sort of titles, I don't think that we can really escape that one. So that leads us on to our last question: gourd or pomegranate?
It would have to be a gourd.
Interesting.
Ooh, why?
I just don't get pomegranates.
Fair enough.
See, that reminds me of one of Naomi's housemates back at uni didn't believe in peas. I'm like, you can not like something, but here are some peas. You can't not believe in them. So you just don't get pomegranates. Fair enough.
Yep.
Fair enough.
Simple as
there
that.
Cool. So, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and details about your Christian journey? Like, we love to hear people's testimony and their story, but then, how did you get to what you're doing now, working with churches and communities, and tell us a bit more about that too.
Yeah, I'm Dan, currently living in central Scotland, so we're just outside Falkirk, kind of in the middle-ish of Scotland, which is a really handy place for me to get to places. It's good transport links from up here. But originally, as the accent might give away, not from these parts, although I've been up in Scotland for 22 and a bit years now. So as I said elsewhere, since before I was born, I've been up here. But in a former life, I was down in Canterbury. That is home. So way down in the southeast of England, and my mum's still down there in my childhood home. So that was home. Upbringing in church was actually with the Salvation Army. That was the background. That was where I was brought up with. Spent a little bit of time even at the Salvation Army College in London, which life took a bit of a turn, shall we say, and didn't end up as we thought things might have went, but ended up then up here in Scotland, and I'd met my now wife there, so she dragged me back up to her patch, and she's from Perth in Scotland. And we continued doing our life and ministry till we moved here centrally. About 2016 we moved to where we are now. And God kind of led us into a different expression of church. I'd worked alongside Falkirk Salvation Army, who was some lovely people there. And it was a very different setting from where we'd come from our previous place. And so we sort of spent actually a really refreshing time going around lots of different churches and just seeing what fit, and actually spending time as a family and doing these things, making those choices. And we landed within a vineyard church. So we're part of Falkirk Vineyard as this time. And that's great, just a different way of expressing our worship. Some have said, Vineyard actually in their sort of compassion ministry is doing, there's lots of synergies with where the Salvation Army came from. So it wasn't too much of a leap, just a little bit less brass, which is good. So with that, pretty much through all my working life, and certainly all the time I've been up here in Scotland, I've been working in community or social enterprise projects. A lot of those have been faith-based projects. I'd spent some time as lay worker within the Salvation Army as well, and helping even set up quite frontline stuff, charity shops, furniture reuse projects, which we described as a new front line of ministry, because you might not go to a church, but you'll go to a charity shop or a furniture project. And there was some wonderful ministry conversations happening within those projects. And one furniture project even started a Bible study sat on the sofas that had been donated, which was brilliant. Wow. Wonderful thing to be doing. So that's kind of led me through all the work that I'm doing, and to where I became, by default, really, I was working for a charity that was heading towards closure, and actually, if I hadn't have been in that place, it wouldn't have opened the doors for what I'm doing now as a freelancer, and just taking all I've learned over the last 25 years anyway, and putting that into helping churches, communities, churches, all as one. So that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've covered it a bit there, but if you had to distill down like the purpose of the business that you run now, what is it?
So everything I've always done, whether I've been running a project, developing it, or supporting it, it's all about enabling people to find their potential, find what they were put on this earth for. So walking alongside people, helping them to even answer the questions that perhaps they don't even know the questions that they've got, but helping them find those answers and walking alongside those projects. And I said right at the top of this that, you know, I've written papers that have written myself out of projects, because this is all about, you know, I'll walk alongside you for a bit, and then there'll come a time where I'll just let you go forwards, and now you can go on and do what you need to do. So a lot of it, as I've discovered, certainly this last year, 18 months, has been about helping people to reconnect. So reconnecting within communities, certainly a lot helping churches and communities to reconnect. Arguably, the church is part of the community, but there's in some places. I'll talk quite a lot generally here. You know, there are some really good examples of how things are going well, but a lot of the places I've come across has been that disconnect. So there's lots of helping churches and communities to reconnect, and I've been with some beautiful churches that have maybe been in rural locations where housing has been built more on the outskirts of the village, and it's grown and grown, and they've not kept up with it. And one particularly has stood, and it's like, you know, hands up, guys, we've not kept up with this. We're sorry. We're here. What do you need? And that's such a wonderful, humble approach to come to being how church perhaps used to be, is in some places, but should be within our communities. So a lot of that is with there. And behind there is all the stuff like the business planning, options appraisals, community surveys, funding applications, legal stuff, governance, all of those kind of things underneath it. But the main bit is to help churches be what they were meant to be, help communities be what they were meant to be, and whatever it needs to do, and eating lots of cake along the way.
I mean, we'll talk a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I'm down with the cake. We'll talk a little bit later about like what that process looks like if a church is approaching you, but especially where there has been a connection to the community in the past, and then there is this disconnect now, and you're there to reconnect. Do you think churches find it easy to recognise that disconnect? And then as an extension of that, is it difficult for churches to ask for help with it and recognise that they might actually need you to come in and help with the reconnection?
Yeah, good question, Joe. So in terms of that, trying to go back to the community, there are some who have fallen into the trap of, well, we're here, we've got our programs,
we never left.
We've been here, where have you guys gone? We'll just sit here and wait for you to come. Now, even in the most modern kind of paraphrase of scripture, I don't read the Great Commission as, well, you just sit there and they will come. I'm sure it says something about going and you know, being amongst the people. You know, I don't know, I'm not a great theologian, but I'm pretty sure that's what I read within there. It's had the word go. And where I found that, what's been really interesting is, so we've done a lot of community surveys. Some of that has been around places where church buildings are earmarked for closure. And obviously there's a lot happening all over the UK at the moment. And people will say, oh, you can't close our church. You can't do that. And it's like, that's great. I agree with you. So how are you engaged with the church? I don't go to the church, but you can't close it. And I've kind of likened it. They want it to be, there's been a connection in the past. Some of that might be through life events, you know, christenings, weddings, and funerals. And they want to know it's there as a kind of spiritual comfort blanket. But there's been something that's made them not want to engage in terms of the other stuff. You know,
they want the spiritual comfort blanket, but they don't realise they're cold.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Ooh, I might take that one. That's going on a t-shirt. So there's been some really interesting conversations around that. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, there are those churches where I feel comfortable working alongside is those that are honest and saying, no, look, there's something not working here. We need to change what we're doing. Interestingly, and you know, certainly for yourselves from that communications point of view, you ask people, like, what would you like to be seeing happening in the church or the church hall, if there is a church hall, and they reel off a whole load of things, and you realise half of those are happening already. And people say, we don't actually know what's going on. And I had certainly one of the earlier churches I've worked with who had quite a successful letting program within their church hall, and they were like, well, it's up to those groups to promote what they're doing. they're just renting space from us. I'm like, well, actually, it doesn't hurt you to put it on your website that this activity is happening, and then link it to that other organisation's Facebook page or profile or whatever it might be. Because if people want to know what's happening, they're not going to go and search for that group. They're going to come to the church because they know there's that hall. So there's been a lot of that missing out on communication opportunities. Certainly as technology has improved, enhanced everything that they're doing, but more so that I think there's been a loss of skills within that, because maybe the younger people have moved away, the technology's increased, and people don't necessarily know what's happening or how to operate this technology, and so it's just fallen into, we'll just leave that, and there's out of date information, and that a lot has caused that reconnect. So in terms of whether they're keen to do it, yes, they are, but usually within the first 5 minutes of speaking to them, we get, we're quite an elderly group, and there's one church who I'm working with, actually south of the border. I've snuck south of the border to come and work in an area, and I won't mention the area for their sake. Their services are quite rooted in historical worship and theology, which is lovely, and it works for some people. And then in the next breath, they're saying, but there's no young people in here. Yeah. And I'm not saying it needs to be all drums and guitars and bells and whistles and all those kind of things, but it's kind of looking at these things, and that kind of worship works, and I wouldn't want to change it, because it's it's a really helpful piece. It's really good to have, but there's options of, as I'm doing with another church, well, let's do a family service in the village hall in the afternoons, because perhaps Sunday morning doesn't work. Yeah. And as has often been said, the odds of our Lord returning at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning are pretty slim. He's more likely to come to a midweek thing and turn up for coffee during the week or whatever. So yeah, there's those that are, well, we're here, why have people not come? We've got our programs, they should come to us. They don't interest me to work with them, because
there's little you can do with it.
Yeah, love you guys, but on you go. We'll see you on the other side. But for those who are saying, well, we need to change, we need to look at the longevity of this church, look at how this church is as an impactful part of the community, then those are the ones I can really get to grips with.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a difficult question off the back of that sort of example you gave. I get the sense in a lot of churches, and there may be some truth in this, that they're saying, look, all we need is a family to join us. And if that family joins us, well, then we can have the Sunday school, and we can do this and do that. And there's probably some truth in that. I guess I'm asking how much, because it's another question to say, well, how do we get that family to join? Because we're not putting on anything that appeals to them remotely. Yep. But have you seen cases where like the families come in and that's changed stuff around, or is that a little bit of a false hope?
Do you know, let me put this as a personal thing. So when we were doing that search for churches ourselves, we went to one church where we knew people, and they knew us. And in fact, my wife went, because our youngest would only have been about 18 months at the time, if that. So she went to a toddler group during the week, and there was this, we're so pleased you guys are here, because you can do this, and you can get involved in this, and you can do this. And we're like, whoa, hang on a minute. We don't even know this is right. And suddenly you're, as you're saying, like, this is our saviour. This family's come in to come and do things. And we went, and in fact, the Vineyard Church that we ended up with, within a couple of weeks, the senior pastors had come and said, look, do you know what? We kind of recognise why you're here and what you're here for, but just whenever, just take your time, feel at home, feel comfortable, feel that you belong. It's that whole belong, believe, behave thing. Just settle in and enjoy the donuts and just relax. And it's not a metaphor. They did literally have donuts at the church.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that was what drew me to them when it said we have good coffee and donuts. We're like, well, we're there, never mind the theology or anything. No.
If anyone knew it was that simple, that should just be on your website, like, just buy donuts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll maybe come to another side of that later on. But yeah, there is those. And in fact, there's another church I'm working with, and I said to them, because they said that, look, the minister was like, since I've been here 5 years, everyone, of course, is 5 years older. And no one's getting any younger, obviously, because that's not how life works. I said, well, have you had any new people come into the church? He said, well, there is one, there's one couple, so in their 40s that have come in. I said, great. I said, what skills have they got? Oh, I don't know. So they're not really engaged. And I gave them an idea, actually stolen from our own church, was actually, why don't you have and whatever label you want to pull on it, but a newcomer's meal. Yeah. So, if you're new to the church in the last 3 months, let's come and break bread together. Let's have a meal and let's just chat. That's really nice. Just gathering around a table to food. Again, I think Jesus did that quite a lot. He loved sitting around tables and eating and chatting with people, and that's where arguably a lot of his great work was done, because you just sit there as equals, you break bread and you have conversation and you find out about people. But the minister was like, that's amazing. Like, it's just eating, but if you want to think that's amazing, great.
But we get locked into the ways of doing things, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there is something in that.
Or not doing things.
It's how you promote what you're doing in the first place, how you attract those, but then ensuring that those people feel welcome, so that you're not pouncing on them, saying, you're new, what job do you want? But saying, hey, lovely to see you. Just settle in, feel comfortable. A couple of weeks' time, we got this meal if you want to come along, and then you start to build that relationship with them. So it has to be an investment of time and maybe some resources to make that happen. But that's certainly the best way that I've found of making that work.
So we talk a lot about community on our podcast. What does community mean to you, and what does it mean in a church context?
So community is. I just love being part of community. Where I live, I always say we're just outside Falkirk. We're in a little village called Camelin, and it is a community amongst itself. We've been here 8 years. I've probably got another 30 years before I'm a local. But you embed yourself in that community. And even, in fact, during COVID, I was community development worker in this area, which was kind of interesting, looking out the window at the community I wasn't allowed to go and do anything with for 2 years. But we managed various things. But even within that, so it's called Camelin. Some people call it Camlin. And both pronunciations feel that they're absolutely spot on, right? That this is how it's called. So actually, part of the community and getting embedded in that. So I had to learn, certainly with some of the more vibrant members of the community, shall we say, how they pronounced it.
Oh, wow.
And try and ensure that I used it in the same way with them, because that was just a way of getting them on side and I'm genuine about being here. And if I did slip, then we had a joke about it.
If there's not like an illustration for church in there, that like we don't want to be politicians, but sometimes it comes down to as simple things as the pronunciation of a word, doesn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's really important to some people. So community is just people. And I just love being among people and helping them, as I said earlier, to find the potential that's within them and move within that. And so as a church context, the church should be just an absolute key part of that. From that faith point of view, no matter what denomination it is, just to be a part of that community, not to stir up any in battles between people or compete even for people. We always say, if you meet someone on the street, if you have the privilege of bringing them to the Lord, that's all you're doing. You're not kind of getting them for your church, you're getting them for the kingdom. And no matter what church that might end up. So community is just people, and that's a bit of a mess sometimes, and that's okay. And we have, there's that great thing within the church, the messy church, but it's about kids and play and those kind of things. I often talk about messed up church, which is that church when there's just lots of really messed up lives that have come in, but it's the kind of place that you think that Jesus would come along and pull up a chair and kick off his sandals and say, pour me a water, I'll do the rest, and just to chill out in that space where there's just mess and hurt and problems and difficulties. And that's not to be depressive about it, but that's life. People are struggling with stuff, and we just need to come alongside those people. In the kind of list of words I use to describe myself, one is an alongside because I guess if you want to put the church context, it could liken back to that footprints poem. When someone said, there was only one set of footprints, where did you go? It's like, well, I was carrying you at that point. But it's that walk along with people, and sometimes you are going to have to carry them, to push them, maybe drag them along with things. Other times you maybe need to hold them back a bit. But whether that is of a faith or just a general life context, there shouldn't really be that much difference. because it's just living with people, understanding people, sometimes perhaps tolerating people, getting involved with stuff, getting your hands dirty with things, and just living. And there's a movement that I'm part of, which is not a faith-based movement. It's called Camarados, and it's worth a little look up. They do things called public living rooms, which are just places where people can sit and chat. So I mentioned earlier, must have donuts. But their thing, even within the mental health policy, was, first of all, don't call it a mental health policy, but actually it was the 3 C's. So you need coffee, custard creams, and Connect 4. And just the simplicity of those things. And they have literally talked about, there's a story of a guy who was in and sat playing Connect 4 for hours in this public living room. And they discovered it in talking to him. He wasn't known to the people who were regulars in there. And this, where are you from? What's your story? And he said, actually, do you know, I got up this morning and I was going to end my life. I don't think I'll bother now, because I've just remembered how much I enjoy Connect 4. Now, if that's not a great recipe for just keeping things simple, just sitting with people. No one wanted to come in with a 6-point plan to fix his life. No one came in with a tract to say, these are some readings you must have. They just came in and said, do you want a coffee? Let's have a game of this. And then conversation ensues, and literally you can save people's lives from that. So yeah, if that within community, take people as they are.
I'll be like, I don't think you can do any better for that for churches. I think we do sort of almost, overcomplicate things, and we do forget how simple it is of actually just coming alongside people, but also people go like, oh no, the coffee doesn't really matter. And I think that's one of the reasons we ask why, like, what's your favourite biscuit? Because it's just a funny thing. But also if we forget that there's that the simplicity of food and just coffee and biscuits or donuts, if your church is that budgeted,
progressive theologically.
But so I call it coffee theology, but it's the wrong term for it. But this whole thing about church, the amount of churches that I've worked with and gone to where all they do is just instant coffee, and I genuinely think that if Jesus was here, if Jesus had done coffee rather than wine, it would have been a really nice cup of coffee. And I think that we forget that just that sort of attitude of, it's not an added extra, but actually it's a really vital part. So the coffee, custard creams, and Connect 4 of just that sort of space where people can just, you don't have to be super highly intellectual or perfect to come into this place of worship, but we can just be human and have a biscuit and just be, and that's okay.
Yeah.
J. John does a good piece about when he offered to do coffee in his church. It's worth going and looking up a reel on his website about that one. It's a really, really funny. That's the way J. John would talk about these things. But in the way that he did coffee, and again, didn't think the coffee was good enough, so they started bringing their own in. The queue when the Johns were doing coffee was longer than any other Sunday on the week because they brought their own stuff. It's very, very good. You have to look at that. But even that, just that thing, if someone's really in a bit of a crisis, just saying, what's your favourite biscuit? It's just distracting for a little bit, take their mind off things, and it's not going to solve their issues, but it's just a way just to start breaking down some barriers a little bit. And actually,
and occasionally a podcast guest will say a Jaffa cake, and then it all goes to pot.
Well, Camarados do say that when they ask your favourite biscuit, but they say anyone saying a fig roll will be kicked out straight away.
Yeah, quite right too. Quite right too.
No, see, I think Jaffa cakes are worse than fig rolls.
Get out.
Anyway, so moving back on topic. So you have this quote on your website. There is a difference between the business of church and church business. Can you expand upon that, please?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is something I really delve into quite a lot. So quite simply, the business of church is the kind of theological stuff, if you like. It's that the restoring, growing healthy relationships, both with God, with people, with his creation. It's the work we do with the Holy Spirit. It's measured through the fruit of the Spirit, if you like. So the love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control stuff. So that's sort of the business of church. The church business is sort of the stuff we do to make that happen. So some of that might be the commerce things, the enterprising activities, whether in some places people might see the pastor as the CEO. I don't necessarily like that analogy, but where they've got a whole staff team of doing things. So this is church business. It's the activities that they'll do, whether that's with employees or just the general things that might not be theologically based, but it might be running that little cafe within the church. It might just be doing that toddler group. It's church business. It could be other community facilities, having a shop, maybe a trading activity. So it's things you can do that will generate other income that enables the business of church to happen. And we could go into it a lot longer than that, but that's sort of that basic analogy. So business of church, the theological stuff, the churchy stuff. The church business is what you generate income to enable the other stuff to happen.
And it's so interesting. I mean, like, the last few years been delving into like the faith and business journey and bringing people who are Christians who own businesses together. But to kind of see the two sides of it, to see like there is definitely a sense that like business makes money so that you can do ministry. But then there's also business is in itself a ministry, or it should be if you're doing it right and you're helping people through that. And it's then really interesting when you bring the business back into the church and the church is doing business to enable you to do the business of church, but then it's the church business is a ministry in itself as well. Yeah. And that crossover and everything's for God ultimately, right? Absolutely.
And I had the privilege quite early on in my time up in Scotland of being sort of the front of house manager within a church cafe. And it was the church was on a corner of a street, and so you had the entrance of a church around one side. The very corner was an entrance to a charity shop, and just round further was the entrance to our cafe. The cafe was called 316. And so whenever anyone asks you to say, why is it called 316? You're like, great, you've asked me to give you the key verse in the Gospels. And we had that within the front of the menus as well. But then when you went through to the toilets were the church toilets. So you were kind of going through into that space. So the two went hand in hand. The cafe was there to make money, to help to extend the ministry of the church. But the cafe was part of the ministry as well. So there was actually the business of church and church business did coincide within there. And there's a great organisation called Heart Edge, which comes out of St Martin in the Fields in London. And they talk about the 4 C's. This back on C's again. We've moved on from custard creams and coffee. And we're going to commerce, compassion, congregation and culture. And I guess that's within another extension of that business of church business thing, is that it's okay for churches to do business for that commerce side of things. Historically, when we would have hundreds and hundreds of people in our congregations, and some are still blessed with having that, then your offering baskets and your donation things are full up, and that helps to pay for the church. There are many that are still faithfully serving their communities, but the congregation is smaller, or certainly Falkirk Vineyard, it moved at one point to the community that we live in, which is it's an area of very high deprivation. So you might still have people in that church, but the offering baskets aren't as full because people haven't got as much money. So you need to look at other ways of generating that income doing church business in order to extend the ministry of the church. You could argue if God's ordained it, God will provide the money, and I use that line a few times. If it's meant to be, it will happen. But sometimes we need to step out a bit. And I mentioned earlier when I was helping set these charity shops up within the Salvation Army, the ministry opportunities that happened by doing some church business and then incorporating the business of church within that. And people were coming and sharing all their stories within, and they'd literally come in to buy something from that charity shop. And you wouldn't necessarily do that when you go into any other kind of shop. And so some of the ministers would then spend more time, and that was their sort of pastoral ministry kind of thing, is I'll just come and hang about in the charity shop. It's just wonderful, and that enables those two sides to collide, which I think is just absolutely beautiful.
So typically when a church approaches you, it doesn't have to be a church, I guess you work with other organisations as well, but in our context, thinking about a church, what does the process look like as you sort of start to work together, and then what are you looking to move towards?
Yeah, and just as an aside on that, hilariously, when I set up freelance, I've got kind of 2 tiers of my standard rates, if you like, and there's a community rate, and the church rate is lower because for my heart I wanted to do that, And then the hilarity of God's economy, about 90% of my work is at the lower rate. So, thanks God for that. But, it's filled up the diary nicely. So, yeah, in terms of the process, it starts with a conversation. It starts with just hearing people's hearts within that. So on the side, I do a bit of development coaching as well. So I'm used to kind of hearing what people are maybe not saying within those conversations. And it's actually, whilst I love coming physically alongside people, and we can drink coffee and eat cake and all those things, actually doing it on Zoom's quite good fun, because it's much easier to eyeball people on the screen, because you're not looking straight in their eyes. You're not sitting across a coffee table gazing lovingly into their eyes. You're staring at a screen.
So they're not trying to avoid your gaze.
So I just want to hear people's heart for their ministry, for their community, for whatever it is that they want to do. And there are times when I will say, actually, do you know what? I don't think I can help you with this, either because it's not quite within what I would be able to do, or I think it's actually too big for the way my diary is, and I need to be honest with people. And thankfully, I've got some other contacts that I can pass people on to, and I always try and refer people on if necessary. And we just sort of very quickly want to try and get to the bottom of it. So it might start with, we need help to try and get some funding to sort our church building out, to make it a bit more accessible, and to enable us to do more. And behind that might be, actually, we want to rip the pews out and just make it a more flexible space. So that's great. But knowing the funding market as it is, and as I said, in 20 odd years of doing this, it's probably one of the toughest the funding market has ever been. Not just even in a faith context, just generally, there's more people after less funding. So that means you need to build a story, because there will be lots of people saying, we want to redo our church and take out the pews and make a more active community space. So the funder will look at that and say, well, so what? I've got a dozen of you that want to do that. So that's when we backpedal a little bit and say, well, how can we make yourselves more visible within the community? What are the community actually wanting? What are they needing? And going out to the community, and yes, going out to the community. There's, I'm planning a community engagement weekend with a church in a couple of months' time. And yes, on the Saturday, the church is going to be open and there's going to be lots of fun stuff happening. But once that's done, we're going to the village pub for a couple of hours just to sit and chat and hang out and listen with people. So going to where the people are on a Saturday afternoon, and just engaging in that. And that might mean that there's some football on the telly and we pretend we're enjoying it, and we have that chat. But really, it's having that conversation and getting to the heart of what, that's your request, but actually what's at the heart of it, what's driving all this. And that usually brings out some challenges, but some wonderful opportunities for people to re-engage. And there was someone responded to a community survey in a rural place recently, and part of it was, would you consider using the church building for an activity, for a concert or whatever? And they said, I'm not really religious, so the church building's not really on my radar. And it was a really interesting comment. And what made it more interesting is that one of the church members who I was working with, who, was an elderly lady with her sight was failing, and, she was, but her heart and her passion was so strong. And she was really challenged by that, as to say, actually, why have we missed that? Why is that not on its radar? I get the faith thing, but why is even our building in this rural space not on his radar? And she was really challenged to how they could address things, to kind of change the narrative a little bit and communicate better with that community, that actually, first and foremost, this is just a space. It's a nice building, it's got good acoustics, come and use it for a concert. We're not going to try and convert you before you step over the threshold. Relationship might happen, and that comes. So yeah, I always want to look and explore those other opportunities. And it's great, even just walking around the place. And no one knows me from Adam, which is great. So I can just walk around, I can observe, I can sit in a cafe and listen, and you start to hear those things that are going on, and then feeding that back into the ministry team that you're working with. So really, there's not a one size fits all process, but the basic skeleton is finding the what they want to do, but understanding the need behind that, and then joining those dots through however long we have together.
Amazing. It sounds really exciting, and doing that with so many different types of churches and organisations as well. Yeah. Like there must be a fun aspect to it.
Yeah, there is. I love it. And I've just been working with a group of community organisations. A lot of them are fledgling organisations. Most of them are taking on community buildings that councils are getting rid of. And in fact, one is taking on church building as well. And so they're currently going through a business growth programme. And I was delivering one of the sessions. I've got another one in a few weeks' time. And they're from all different walks of life. And as part of this session, it's beautiful because I did the training session and then they all got the option of a one-to-one with me to chat over things. And yeah, even within that, it's just wonderful to hear their heart. They've come in with their list of questions and I'm saying, so why are you on the programme? What's driving? What's your heart for this? And digging within that actually helps to solve some of the bigger problems that they've got because that's where their mind is focused on the big issues. And you think, well, why did you want to come here in the first place? Why did you want to do this? And whether that's community or church setting, that question is really, really helpful for many people.
Yeah. So bringing it home, if we could ask you for one question, what is the biggest mistake that you see churches making when they're thinking about growth?
I would probably go back to where we talked about earlier, is that they're just opening the doors and putting activities on. And the thought that, people might want to come to that, whether it's a toddler group or a cafe. We'll open our doors and people will come. I'm sorry, it's not that easy anymore. It might involve some time going out and understanding actually what people really need. Or what are the barriers for them even coming over the threshold of that church building, because many of them have done that and then they say, no one came, no one wanted it, so we'll just scrap that. And actually it could be the biggest need for that community, they've just gone about it the wrong way. Or someone else is doing something similar. Hey, shock horror, we doesn't need to all be badged with the church, we can go and partner with another group and do stuff. Small C chaplain, some of these things if you like. Forgetting just to actually understand where people are at, because people are not at the place that we think they are.
That's great.
Oh, I love that. So thank you so much for being here today. I found it, I agree with everything that you've said, but it's challenging stuff. It's very easy for us to talk about it and, suggest it, but to actually see it in practice and to get people to just think that a little bit differently about bridging the gap between sort of church and community and sort of adjusting to not see the diminishing sort of fall of current church life. Anyway, never mind. But thank you. I found that very helpful. How can churches or anyone connect with you and find out more about working with you?
Yeah, thank you. So the website is communitydan.co.uk. And just look for Community Dan on Facebook and Instagram and Blue Sky and LinkedIn. So Community Dan just all over the place. communitydan.co.uk, all the contact details are there. And whilst I am quite busy with stuff at the minute, which is lovely, there's always a chance to have a chat with people. So even if I can't directly help, always happy to talk to people and maybe signpost them somewhere else. And yes, while I'm based in Scotland, I can work anywhere.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Gourds and Pomegranates is brought to you by Joe Gallant and Hannah Fleming Hill. You can find episode transcripts and contact the show via gppodcast.uk.